Hello, online pipe community. Ethan, parsimonious piper, and once more I am together with,
Butter Piper.
and we are going into C.S. Lewis Screwtape letter number 21. We're about two-thirds of the way through them. Well, I'm reading this week, so let me set my pipe down. Let's dive right in. My dear Wormwood, yes, a period of sexual temptation is an excellent time for working in a subordinate attack on the patient's peevishness. It may even be the main attack, as long as he thinks it the subordinate one. But here, as in everything else, the way must be prepared for your moral assault by darkening his intellect. Men are not angered by mere misfortune, but by misfortune conceived as injury. And the sense of injury depends on the feeling that a legitimate claim has been denied. The more claims on life, therefore, that your patient can be induced to make, the more often he will feel injured and, as a result, ill tempered. Now, you will have noticed that nothing throws him into a passion so easily as to find a tract of time which he reckoned on having at his own disposal unexpectedly taken from him. It is the unexpected visitor, when he looked forward to a quiet evening, or the friend's talkative wife turning up when he looked toward a tete a tete with the friend, that throws him out of gear. Now, he is not yet so uncharitable or slothful that these small demands on his courtesy are in themselves too much for it. They anger him because he regards his time as his own and feels that it is being stolen. You must therefore zealously guard in his mind the curious assumption, my time is my own. Let him have the feeling that he starts each day as the lawful possessor of 24 hours. Let him feel as a grievous tax that portion of his property which he has to make over to his employers, and as a generous donation that further portion which he allows to religious duties. But what he must never be permitted to doubt is that the total from which these deductions have been made was, in some mysterious sense, his own personal birthright. You have here a delicate task. The assumption which you want him to go on making is so absurd that, if once it is questioned, even we cannot find a shred of argument in its defense. The man can neither make nor retain one moment of time. It all comes to him by pure gift. He might as well regard the sun and moon as his shadows. He is also, in theory, committed to a total service of the enemy. And if the enemy appeared to him in bodily form and demanded that total service for even one day, he would not refuse. He would be greatly relieved if that one day involved nothing harder than listening to the conversation of a foolish woman. And he would be relieved almost to the pitch of disappointment if, for 1/2 hour in that day, the enemy said, now you may go and amuse yourself. Now, if he thinks about his assumption for a moment, even he is bound to realize that he is actually in this situation every day. When I speak of preserving this assumption in his mind, therefore, the last thing I mean you to do is to furnish him with arguments in its defense. There aren't any. Your task is purely negative. Don't let his thoughts come anywhere near it. Wrap a darkness around it, and in the center of that darkness, let his sense of ownership in time lie silent, uninspected, and operative. The sense of ownership in general is always to be encouraged. The humans are always putting up claims to ownership which sound equally funny in heaven and in hell, and we must keep them doing so. Much of the modern resistance to chastity comes from men's belief that they own their bodies, those vast and perilous estates pulsating with the energy that made the worlds, in which they find themselves without their consent, and from which they are ejected at the pleasure of another. It is as if a royal child whom his father has placed, for love's sake, in titular command of some great province, under the real rule of wise counselors, should come to fancy he really owns the cities, the forests, and the corn, in the same way as he owns the bricks on the nursery floor. We produce this sense of ownership not only by pride, but by confusion. We teach them not to notice the different senses of the possessive pronoun, the finely graded differences that run from my boots through my dog, my servant, my wife, my father, my master, and my country to my God. They can be taught to reduce all these senses to that of my boots, the my of ownership. Even in the nursery, a child can be taught to mean by my teddy bear, not the old imagined recipient of affection to whom it stands in a special relation, for that is what the enemy will teach them to mean if they are not careful. But the bear I can pull to pieces if I like. And at the other end of the scale, we have taught men to say, my God, in a sense not really different from my boots, meaning the God on whom I have a claim for my distinguished services and whom I exploit from the pulpit, the God I have a corner in. And all the time, the joke is that the word mine, in its fully possessive sense, cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. In the long run, either our father or the enemy will say mine of each thing that exists, and especially of each man. They will find out in the end, never fear, to whom their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong. Certainly not to them, whatever happens. At present, the enemy says mine of everything on the pedantic, legalistic ground that he made it. Our Father hopes in the end to say mine of all things on the more realistic and dynamic ground of conquest. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
Thank you, Ethan. My time, my body. This one really made me think. It made me think of all the petty things that I get annoyed with because my time has been, and as Lewis puts it, not just misfortune, but the injury that it caused me. And I think of my time, especially with driving. And I'm not a fan of driving. And I don't know why. It could be because, which would be a good thing, is, I was taught by my father that you never be late. And that's a good thing. Respect other people's time, respect the fact um, that you set a time with somebody, and so respect that, which is a good. But then you think of how the evil one uses that good to pervert it into an injury because something happened with that quote ownership of time. And I think of driving, where I wish personally I could enjoy the time of driving, and I try to, but when I get in the car, my mind and heart is already on the place I'm going. So the time to get there, if something interrupts it, I get extremely annoyed. And that's what the evil one wants. He wants that annoyance of the injury of my time, which I believe I own. And I have to say, before I read this letter again, I can't say that I gave it too much thought on the fact that I think I own that time. I own that time, and how often that there's some sort of slowdown, and if it's you know do I think of the fact that somebody could be injured and pray for that person? But the evil one wants me to get stuck on my injury, the injury of my time that I can't get to where I need to go. And that's exactly what he doesn't want. He doesn't want us to think of the defense or the fact that there could be an injury somewhere else, but to make it personal to myself. So that thought of time really hit me, of the fact of how often. And I was thinking, also shared about, you know, visiting, and I'm sure many viewers can relate to this. We go to a doctor's office and we're annoyed because they're late, And yet I remember one particular doctor that I had, and he was great. And he would spend the time with you, and he cared about you as a person. You weren't an insurance bill, you weren't whatever it is. He cared about you at that moment and that time. And yet how often I get angry and that I'm not getting in at the time I need to. And then it's not the fact that that time is not important. If I had an appointment at 3 o'clock, it's not that that's important. It's what the enemy wants to, the enemy being the evil one, wants to do with my mind and heart to get aggravated. And that's to me, that is so important. It's not that you have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. The fact that I had a 3 o'clock appointment, why I'm not in there? It's not that that's not important. It's the fact that he wants me to get aggravated enough that my time has been injured, and it's a personal offense to me. And so it's really made me think of that ownership of time. And then he goes into body, and there's so much. I mean, in this day and age now, with so much that's going on with transgender, abortion, and so forth, and those are hot button issues in and of themselves. But that fact of, like, it's my body, and again, it's that fact of where do I own my body, or am I my body and soul? So I'll leave my introduction at the fact that it really challenged me to think about what is really mine.
Well, and that concept of ownership, boy, here in the Western world, America in particular, we think my, and the whole notion of ownership of property is certainly biblical. Especially, if you read back through the Old Testament, um, the patriarchs were blessed by God with great material wealth that was theirs, but they were custodians of it. They acknowledged its source. And when we look through into the New Testament, we see that we are called not to hold on to things of this world. Uh, they really aren't ours. We're custodians of them in the greatest sense. Lewis has Screwtape go through this really perfect, to me, breakdown of the senses of ownership, the meanings of starting with something inanimate, my boots. Those are mine. I own them. Up through my dog, my wife, my father. My ultimately leading to my God. And the truth is that each of those has a different meaning. That my wife isn't my wife in the same way that my boots are my boots, certainly. And by the time we get up to my God, God isn't mine, I'm his. But we think of it as my God. Well, this entire concept is just blown apart here, because as Screwtape says, the notion that we are even owners of our time, that can't really be seriously defended. Well, that extends to all of these other things too, that we participate in managing and caring for these things, these people, etc., these relationships, but they don't belong to us. And that totality, if we keep a my mindset, what we've done is we've lost that proper relationship and alignment vertically with God. We have put ourselves as masters instead of as caretakers. Going back to the earliest chapters of Genesis, when God gave Adam and Eve the command to be custodians, to manage, to be good servants, but to manage the world around them, to care for it. Uh, we are caretakers of everything that we have. We are not owners. The example he gives too of body ownership. Well, we're placed in this body without any choice of our own, and most of us will be removed from this body without any choice of our own. That that gives us a different perspective on the body. There is there is a being far higher than us that actually has ownership of that. It's so true of absolutely everything. But we have this my sense. Like I said, that completely breaks the relationship, where we're subservient and God is not. God owns everything. The enemy wants to take it, as Screwtape finishes in the end, saying, that what God claims, because He created it, uh, Satan wants to take by conquer.
That made me think of one of our great thinkers in the Catholic world. Not that it has to be limited to that, but Thomas Aquinas, and he defended ownership, um, because some people do like to use the scriptures and Jesus's words about giving to the poor and so forth. And when the apostles sell their land and sell things and they give it away, almost to a present day, communist understanding that everybody deserves, everybody gets to have equal of everybody. And Aquinas defends ownership in the same way you were saying, is whether you have more or less than someone else doesn't matter, in the sense that if you worked hard and were able to acquire riches and land and so forth, then you were blessed by God through your desire, through your talents, to have this ownership of, quote, more, but for the purpose of how does that ownership become stewardship, to be able to use as God sees fit. And it's like whether you're whether you're a servant or the landowner. If you're the landowner, how are you serving God's greater purpose in serving others? And it's an interesting distinction, very different than a communist understanding, because it doesn't deny ownership. It actually gives the owner that responsibility of what does it mean to be a steward of those great blessings that you have acquired through your hard work, but the fact that God has blessed you through that, and how do you in turn bless others? And it's a good check and balance for everyone, but especially those, because those who through their talents, through their desire and hard work, can own more. But yet I love how Lewis challenges us in this letter to look at how the evil one wants to pervert that ownership to be that it's all about mine. Like the teddy bear, do I own the teddy bear because of the affection that I give or it gives, or because I can tear it apart? I can do whatever I want to do with my stuff. So so definitely, I see where you're going with that sense of ownership and stewardship.
Well, and it, talking about the communist versus capitalist views of ownership, this blows up both of them, in in terms of our, because both of those views are actually driven by the same thing, and that is selfishness. uh, People often don't see that communism and capitalism in their extremes are really two sides of the same coin in terms of what motivates them. It is self, and what do I get out of each one? And that takes our eyes off of the provider of all of these good things. I I it drives me nuts when people talk about God being against wealth. God, one of God's most common gifts in the Bible is wealth, and yet He makes very high demands on those to whom He gives great wealth. We saw that in the story of Jesus and the rich young ruler, when he asked, well, what do I need to do? And Jesus says, sell everything you've got and follow me. Well, we're not literally told to get rid of all of our possessions. The It's a heart issue. It's what is actually the top of the heap in our priorities, and in what it is that we worship. And and this, it's true of our bodies, it's true of our relationships, it's most definitely true of our time. A very challenging and convicting letter from Lewis this time.
The word that comes to mind is virtue. And I was reading an article where it was talking about, like you said, capitalism, or these words like diversity, equity, inclusion, and all these type of things. And a point of this article was, whether it's democracy or monarchy, we think that democracy, is better than anything else. And this, something I read said, it really doesn't matter whether it's a monarchy or a democracy. It has to be done in virtue, where it's ultimately about something greater than yourself. And like you said, capitalism without virtue is going to be self-centered and destructive. And so it's ultimately about virtue, where Screwtape wants it to be about mine. It's about mine. I can do whatever I want, instead of the blessings that have been given to me, and how do I use those at the service of God.
Well, and acknowledging that everything we have, our time, our bodies, our friendships, those are all gifts. They can all be taken away. And yeah, read the book of Job if you don't think that that's true. Well, folks, I do hope that this has not been a waste of your time, and that you take something away from this that makes you very seriously consider your priorities and your sense of mine. While you do that, like something you like. We'll see you next week.